Hey, all students. Just digging into a new unit. This will be the start of our drugs unit, which is going to cover medicines, and what falls into medicines and drugs. We'll talk the first couple of days about prescription drugs, over-the-counter drugs, and the abuse and misuse of those types of drugs. Then we'll get into a section where we start to talk about tobacco use, alcohol use, as well as illegal drugs and illicit drugs. So that's what the unit will be. This particular chapter, chapter 19, is only 2 lessons. And this is where we're talking about medicines, the abuse of medicines, as well as over-the-counter drugs. So that's just 2 lessons. So if you take a peek at just the overview, it's going to focus on the types of different medicines, the reactions of medicines, and using different types of medicines safely. Lesson 1 is just going to be medicine use. We'll talk about medicines used to treat and prevent illness, classified based on how they work in the body. Medicines how they affect the body. Depends on how many different factors that kind of fall into it. So we'll talk about the effects that they have and why some types of medicines are used, and why some aren't. Lesson 2, we'll talk a little bit more about how medicines are regulated by the government to make them safe use. Talk about the FDA and how medicines actually are approved to be used. And it's kind of an interesting topic right now because our FDA is kind of going through the process of certain things right now as to why, shouldn't say as to why, going through the process to approve certain types of medicine. So you can see kind of in the midst of our current situation right now with the pandemic, there's certain treatment medicines that people are talking about quite often that are supposed to help with COVID-19, but they're going through the process of testing these in human trials for their safety purposes as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about taking medications safely when they're used for intended purposes and according to how the labels direct people to take them. So you're actually going to, if you want, this is an optional video, but I would spread it out over the course of 3 days because it's about 30 to 35 minutes long. And then there's a little small section video at the end. So there's 2 videos actually, but the small section video gets a little bit deeper into what's happening to the brain. So there's why do I play this specific video during the medicines unit? Because there's a section in there where it talks about the stories about Derek Boogaard. Derek Boogaard was a fighter or an enforcer in the National Hockey League. He played for the Minnesota Wild, and he actually passed away a couple of years ago here. But it gets into it takes a little while to get into it. It's actually more of for an entertainment factor at the beginning. Kind of talks about how he started up in the NHL, talks about how he gets into his role in the NHL, which is an enforcer or a fighter, so to speak. And really kind of starts to talk about how his injuries get him into abusing painkillers. So I show that during this particular unit. And this is just a video of the day. Normally in class, we'd watch about 15 minutes of it or 10 minutes of it in class one day, another 10 minutes the next day, another 10 minutes. But I show it because it kind of shows the experience of Derek Boogaard and how he gets addicted to painkillers because of some of the injuries he dealt with fighting in the NHL. But really what starts to get kind of interesting towards the end is when they start talking about how the concussions that he sustained caused another type of illness that is starting to become, obviously, over the course of the last couple of years, a real big topic, and that's CTE, chronic traumatic encephalitis, and how that affected some of the decisions that he made, especially with his abuse to painkillers, and how that affected him. It also talks about a little bit about how his depression and his mood were affected by, or particularly a result of some of the CTE that he dealt with, and then talks about how that ultimately took his life. So that's an interesting video. Like I said, it's optional. You don't have to watch it if you don't want to. Some people think, well, I don't know why am I watching fighting and hockey? Well, really the story is about getting into the use of painkillers, over-the-counter drugs, certain things that he took, and then really the last portion of it, talking about the effects it had on his brain because of the multiple concussions that he had and the chronic traumatic encephalitis. So, like I said, you can watch that if you want to. A couple assignments that you'll have within these 2 days. 19.1 on the first lesson, you'll have a quiz. On the second lesson, you'll have a worksheet. So we'll get into Chapter 20 shortly after that, which is a tobacco unit. Have a good day.